Act 60 is an education financing law that has been called Vermont's Titanic. It is slowly but surely sinking the state into icy waters of unanchored education spending. Today, we are going to understand this financial debacle. In the 20th century, Vermont public schools were funded by the town's property taxes. Wealthy, or gold towns as they were called, like ski resorts, Stowe, Manchester with its designer outlets, these towns were able to spend more money, say upwards of $5,000 per student, and had low property taxes. In comparison, lower income towns had higher property taxes and spent less, say between $2,000 and $3,000 per student. In 1997, this was brought to the Vermont Supreme Court, which ruled that the disparity in tax resources was unconstitutional. This case is known as the Brigham decision, in which the court directed the legislature to fix the newly identified problem. Legislators passed Act 60, later amended as Act 68, and this new law decreed that the taxes from every town would pool together into a state fund and then get redistributed. So, did it work? Well, education spending has become more equitable across towns, but three important consequences have followed. 1, there have been no related improvements in educational outcomes. 2, education spending has ballooned. And 3, many public schools have shut down, while in wealthy towns, new private schools have popped up and become overnight successes. Rob Roper is the president of the Ethan Allen Institute, a Vermont policy think tank, and he has years of experience dealing with this complex issue. So Rob, the question that I want you to explain to our viewers, why have there been no improvements in educational outcomes?
Well, wow, that's a big question to answer, but I think the important point is that there haven't been, as you pointed out. Act 60 is now, it was 1997 that it passed, so it's had plenty of time to do its thing.
Right.
And what we've seen is we've lost about 30,000 kids from our public school system. That's about 30%, which is huge. You know, if this is the greatest education system that the states have to offer, how come we're losing customers, as it were? Even though there's fewer students, the costs have ballooned, exploded. And the reason why is because nobody is accountable for public education under Act 60. If you want to complain to your state legislator, who, they collect the money and pool the money, you say, hey, why aren't the schools getting any better? Well, that's because the budgets are being passed at the local level. But then you go to the local people and say, hey, why are my taxes going up and we're not getting anything for the school? Well, it's the state issue. So it goes back and forth. And I think that's part of the design. Everybody says, this is a mess. It's terrible. Why would anybody design a system like this?
Yeah.
Well, if your objective is to educate children, it is a terrible mess in an equitable way for the taxpayers.
Right.
It is a mess. But if your design is to extract the most amount of money with the least amount of accountability to fuel your own special interests, it's a Swiss watch. And it's been working that way for 30 years. And the teachers' unions and the special interests that are surrounding the education establishment have gotten a ton of money and a ton of power. And it's becoming even more decentralized. I mean, we talk about Act 60, but the latest thing that we've had is Act 46, which is eliminating the local school boards.
Right.
So there's even less accountability at the local level. It's only going to get worse. It's a grab of power. It's a grab of money. And the people who are not being served well by this are the children and the taxpayers.
So what are some realistic solutions to this problem, if any?
Well, I would like to see, there are a couple things you could do. If the state is going to be responsible for collecting the tax money, then they should be responsible for spending the tax money. You have to put those two things together. Right now, the towns determine how much we're going to spend, and the state is responsible for raising the money. So, and that's where you get the fingers pointing in the other directions.
Right, I see.
So I would actually, usually I'm in favor of local control, but as you pointed out, this is a much more equitable way to fund education. But the state should be, we're going to control, if we're going to be raising the taxes, we're going to be controlling the spending, and therefore we're accountable for both ends of that equation. So that's an important thing. But for the kids, the most important thing for kids to get the outcomes up. And Vermont Public Schools do a great job educating mainstream kids. The kids who show up, they come from families where they're getting education at home,
Right.
educational experiences, they're well fed, and they're emotionally stable. But public schools do a terrible job of dealing with kids who have special needs or come from low-income households.
Okay.
And the way to solve that inequity is through school choice.
School choice.
And we have school choice in Vermont. It's the oldest school choice system in the country. It's the most comprehensive, the most dynamic. The problem with it only serves about 90 towns throughout the state.
Why is that?
Because the way our law is if you do not have a public school within your district, then you get the money to send your child to the public or private or independent school of your choice.
Right.
And there are 90 districts or so that don't have a public school servicing the district.
Right.
And St. Johnsbury Academy, Burr & Burton Academy here in Manchester,
Right.
Thetford Academy, the Linden Institute. You look at all these schools that have big ones and small ones that have grown up in this wonderful economic opportunity of being able to reach out to customers who have the voucher, essentially.
Right, yeah.
It's called tuitioning in Vermont,
Right.
but they get a tuition voucher, essentially,
Yeah.
to send their kid to the school, and you have people competing for those resources. And they provide great services for the kids, often better services for a much lower amount of money, because the voucher tends to be about $5,000 less.
Mm-hmm.
It's not supposed to be, but it works out to be about $5,000 less than the statewide average that we spend on a public school student. So we need to have more of that dynamic. We need to be expanding that. Unfortunately, under Act 46, school consolidation of districts, we're trying to squeeze those independent schools
So
out.
aren't both the solutions that you suggested contradicting each other when you're saying we need more state accountability, but at the same time school choice? Or
No, it might seem that
Yeah,
way, and
yeah.
I see why you asked the
Yeah,
question.
yeah.
If the state devolves raising the money,
Yeah.
we raise the money and
Yeah.
we determine how much a student gets. We determine the voucher amount, essentially. But
right.
their control goes away in what the solution I'm proposing, and the responsibility then goes to the parent or the guardian.
Right.
And that's where you want to have the control.
exactly,
That,
with the parent.
with the parent.
So the way out of this mess is expanding school choice.
I think so, and there's some really cool ways that we can, tweak the system to create the incentives to have a better outcome for lower money as well.
Okay, thank you for explaining this, Rob.
Thank you.